Hello friends and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa. As usual, feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. Today we continue our series about the friends beyond death, where we talk about 5 monks from Kassapa, Buddha's time, who were very, very committed practitioners who did extremely austere and very committed practices, and they were so determined to attain arahantship that they put their lives on the line in order to practice. Unfortunately for them, they were not able to attain arahantship, and they actually put their life on the line and actually did pass away. But because of their strong practice, they were able to create very strong karmic affinities with the Dharma. And so when our Buddha, Gautama Buddha, became a Buddha and was starting to teach the Dhamma again, they were reborn again in India as human beings, and they again came in contact with the Dhamma and then made progress. And most of them actually became arahants. One of them became an anagami. That was Pukusati, who we talked about last time. And so in this mini-series, we are talking about the life stories of these 5 monks and also the suttas that the Buddha gave to them. And all of them have very unique stories and very unique suttas. So it's very interesting, I think. I like their stories very much anyway. And so the last few sessions, we already talked about 2 monks. We talked about Sabya and we talked about Pukusati. And today we will talk about another monk who is called Dabba Malaputta. And before we read his sutta, we will talk a little bit about his biography. As usual, this comes from the commentaries. So it's up to you if you want to believe in those stories or not, but I think they provide some kind of background to the stories, and they are actually quite interesting. So for Dabba also, because of his strong affinities with the Dhamma, he had quite some unusual events in his life. For example, he had a very miraculous birth. A lot of miracles happened around his birth, and also some very unfortunate events. When his mother was pregnant with him and when his mother was giving birth, she actually passed away. And people also assumed that the child, the baby, had passed away because it was still in the belly of the mother. So Dabba was still in the belly of the mother after she had died. And then, as it was the custom back then, they put her on a funeral pyre and they burned the body. And when the body was burned and the flames were extinguished, they found the baby lying on the pyre, and the baby was alive and the baby was unharmed. So that was the miracle of Dabba's birth, that he was able to survive this kind of birth. And then when he was 7 years old, he came in contact with the Buddha. So he had a very, very strong karmic affinity with the Dhamma. And already at the age of 7, he came in contact with the Buddha. And straight away, he asked his grandmother, who was raising him after the mother passed, to allow him to get ordained. And the grandmother also allowed him to go forth. And then when, before the ordination, in preparation for the ordination, they shaved his head. They did the head shaving ceremony. And as the head was being shaven, he was contemplating various Dharma principles. He was thinking about impermanence. And as the hair was gradually removed, his defilements were gradually removed from the mind. And when the head was shaven, he had attained arahantship at the age of 7, even before becoming ordained. And so the Buddha recognized that he had already become an arahant, and at the age of 7, Dabba Malaputta became a fully ordained monk. So he wasn't only given the novice ordination as is usual for children, but he was actually given the full ordination, which is very, very unusual, because obviously usually as a man, you can only get full ordination at the age of 20. For women, that's a little bit different. Some women can get full ordination already at the age of 12. But for men, the usual age is 20, but for Dabba, there was an exception, since he was already an arahant. And so, since Dabba had already attained arahantship at the age of 7, he was thinking that he had his whole life still ahead of him, but there was nothing further for him to be done. So he was thinking what would be a useful way of making use of this life that he still had. So he thought it would be good if he was of service to the other monastics in the community. And so he thought that he could take over some responsibilities for the Sangha and become a Sangha official and manage the various tasks that are necessary in a monastery. So he offered to the Buddha to become the coordinator for the lodgings and the coordinator for the meals for the Sangha. So a coordinator for the lodgings is a person like what we today call a guest monk or a guest nun. They are taking care of people who are coming and going to the monastery. Especially back in the day, most of the Sangha was a wandering Sangha. They didn't stay in one place for too long. So constantly people were coming into the monastery and they needed a place to sleep, and they needed a kuti, so a meditation hut, allocated to them where they could stay overnight, and they needed to be informed about all the local procedures, where to go on alms round, how the Sangha had organized the various tasks. So all the introductions that are necessary. And this is what Dabba did for the monastic community. And he was also the allocator of meals. So an allocator of meals is also something we still have in modern monasteries nowadays. That's if there are lay people and they tell the monastery that they would like to offer meals for the Sangha. Sometimes they say, we would like to invite whatever X amount of monastics to come to our house for a house dana. Let's say they invite 4 people, then the meal allocator would send 4 monks or 4 nuns to go there, and there's a roster so that everybody gets to go at some point. And if people like to go, then we can say everybody gets to go at some point. People take turns. And if people don't like to go because they want to meditate and they want to just stay in solitude, then we have to say, well, everybody has to go at some point. But in any case, people are taking turns, and there's somebody responsible in a Sangha to make sure that this is fairly distributed and everybody goes at some point. And so this was also Dabba's job. And Dabba performed these services so outstandingly that he became the monk who was appointed as the one foremost of allocating lodgings. So that's Dabba's foremost quality, taking care of the Sangha in that way. And Dabba also, because he was an arahant, had some psychic powers. This is a very famous story about Dabba. I think most people would probably be familiar with the story. And he had this psychic power where he had mastery over the fire element, and therefore he could turn his finger into a torchlight. And monks and nuns back in the day, they would arrive purposely late in the evening or late at night. So it was already dark, and then Dabba would ignite his finger and use his finger as a torch and guide them to the kutis that were allocated to them, so the meditation huts that were allocated to them. And then the monks and nuns would purposely ask for places very far away to stay, like on the top of a mountain or some other very far away place, so that they would get to see Dabba performing this fire miracle and turning his finger into a torch and showing the way that way. So that's what Dabba was famous for, his finger torch. But unfortunately, of course, outstanding people also attract a lot of criticism from people who are jealous. And back in the day, there was a group called the Group of 6 Monks. So this is a group that occurs all over the Vinaya and all over the suttas. They're quite famous. And this was a group of notoriously misbehaving monks and nuns. But the leaders were 6 monks, which is why they're called the group of 6 monks. And because they were so notorious, they actually split up. And 2 of them stayed in Rajagaha, 2 of them stayed in Savatthi, and 2 of them stayed in Kitagiri. So in all the big centers of Buddhism, there were representatives of this misbehaving group of monks and making problems for the rest of the Sangha. And they had a special disliking towards Daba. And in the sutta that we are reading today, one monk from the group of 6 is creating problems for Daba. And so they were constantly creating problems for Daba. They were harassing him, they were slandering him, and we have a lot of Vinaya rules that were caused by an interaction between the group of 6 monks and Daba Malaputta. And I think at this point we can start reading our sutta, which is about this group of 6 monks and their interaction with Daba Malaputta. I have put a link in the live chat. And this sutta is called Metya and Metya Slander Daba. This is from a Chinese sutta from the Samyukta Agama, but we have exactly the same story in the Pali. So in the Pali, we find this story in the Vinaya. This is a story that we find in the Bhikkhu Sangatisesa 8. So if you want to check it out there, that's fine too. I just thought it's also nice to mix it up a bit and not only read suttas from the Pali, but also read suttas from other traditions. And since here we have an English translation, I think this is a perfect opportunity to read this sutta and to compare a little bit with the Pali also. So this sutta, as I mentioned, is called Metya and Metya Slander Daba. So there are 2 people here. Both of them have a very, very similar name, of course. The one with the long A, Metya, is the bhikkhuni, and the one with the short A is the bhikkhu. And those 2 are brother and sister also in lay life. And the monk Metya is one of the 6 leaders of the group of 6 monks. So he was a very influential back in the day, and he was also notoriously misbehaving. He occurs very many times in other suttas too. And his companion, Bhumajaka, those 2, Metya and Bhumajaka, are basically a notorious duo that appears many, many times. And here we also see his sister, Metya. And the sutta begins. Thus have I heard, once the Buddha was staying in Rajagaha in the bamboo grove of Kalanda. At that time, there was the monk Daba Malaputta. When the world-honored one put him in charge of provisions and lodgings, Daba, having received the order, served as the manager. So this is what I have already talked about a little bit. Daba was thinking, how could he be of service to the other monks and nuns? Since he was already enlightened, he didn't have any more work to do. So he offered to be in charge of the lodgings and what is here translated as provisions. And in the Pali tradition, we usually call the meal allocator. But that's the same thing, both in the Pali and in the Chinese version. And then one time later, it was the turn of a monk called Metya to receive an invitation from a donor, according to the order among the monks. So as I mentioned, there is a roster, and Daba was allocating the slots in order, and at some point, it came to the monk Metya to have the opportunity to go to this house dana. And according to the order among the monks, Daba sent Metya to partake of the food at the donor's place. So Daba was conscientiously doing his job, and he didn't discriminate against anybody, so he just sent Metya when it was his turn. That's what the sutta here is telling us. And then when Metya went there, however, the food was extremely unpalatable. After this had happened 3 times, Metya felt extremely sorry for himself and consequently was greatly distressed. He told his sister, the nun Metya, whenever Daba sends me to a meal, every time I get extremely unpalatable food. What a misery. So, obviously, Metya is a monk who likes to go to house danas and he enjoys eating good food. But unfortunately for him, it didn't quite work out. And every time he got sent to a house dana, every time it was his go, for some reason, the food wasn't that great. In the Pali version of this story, there is a little bit more background information on what's happening here. So in the Pali version of the story, there's actually a householder, a lay person, who's offering a regular meal to the Sangha. And he told Daba to send 4 monks every day. So every day, 4 different monks get to go according to the order, according to, well, the roster that they have prepared. And that lay person is also a very strong Dhamma follower, so he often comes to the monastery. And this one time he came to the monastery for a Dhamma talk, to hear a Dhamma talk, and it so happened that he met Daba on the way, and he asked, he had some small talk with Daba, and then he asked Daba who were the monks who were coming to his house the following day. And then Daba told him that the following day it was this Mettiya and Bhumachaka and the group of 6 monks who were coming to his house. And that layperson was really upset about that because they were well known as really bad monks. And so he didn't really quite want to serve them any food because he thought that there wasn't much merit looking after those people, and they weren't proper monks anyway, like not properly practicing anyway. So he wasn't too happy to have them at his house on that particular day. And so usually this layperson was well known for preparing really, really nice food and for treating the monks very respectfully. But on that particular day, he then instructed one of his female servants to just to not even let the monks come into the house, to just prepare a few mats on the floor outside on the veranda, and to prepare some old broken rice, and not to prepare any kind of good food. So when Mettiya and Bhumachaka and the other group of 6 monks came to the house, they had to sit outside, and instead of being served by the householder personally and being respected, they just had to eat this old rice on the porch of the house and then leave again. So obviously they thought that Daba had slandered them, and Daba had influenced that lay follower negatively, and for that reason they were quite angry with Daba. So that is the story in the Pali for why the food was so bad on that particular day. But obviously it wasn't Daba's fault. It was just that the lay person wasn't inspired by the kind of people that were coming to his house on that particular day. Anyway, in both versions, the Pali version and this Chinese version, Mettiya is unhappy about what happened. And he complains to his sister Mettiya. And here now the story continues. And then he said to the nun Mettiya, "Sister, Daba has afflicted me 3 times with bad food. Couldn't you now use some skillful means to revenge my anger?" And the nun Mettiya said, "But how could I help you?" And the monk Mettiya said, "I have a plan. Go to the Buddha and say, Daba once sexually harassed me. And I will bear witness and say, it is true, it is true." The nun Mettiya said, "But wouldn't it be slander to accuse someone who has been pure in keeping the precepts?" Thereupon the monk Mettiya said, "Sister, if you don't do this for me, then from now on I won't speak to you again anymore." The nun said, "Well, if you insist, I will do as you say." The monk Mettiya said, "Sister, let me go first, you follow later." So here, I think this is one of the most interesting parts of the sutta, and this really shows us how we can be very easily influenced by the people around us. So here we have the nun Mettiya, and the nun Mettiya actually herself isn't angry in the beginning. And she doesn't feel upset towards Daba. She doesn't have any resentment towards Daba. And she also has a very strong moral compass here. Like, she clearly sees that it's not okay to slander somebody who hasn't done anything. And she kind of sees that this would be an unwholesome thing to do. So she is not actually all that willing to do these kind of things in the beginning. But then there's social pressure. She's emotionally attached, obviously, to her family. And her brother, the monk, is putting a lot of pressure on her. And he's threatening her with, emotional neglect. He's threatening not to talk to her anymore in the future. And so for that reason, she finally kind of ignores her own doubts about the wholesomeness of the situation, and she ignores her own conscience, and she just consents to doing something unwholesome because there is some social pressure and there are some social expectations on her to behave in a certain way. And I think this is something that many of us also experience in our daily life. And something that the Buddha also addressed over and over in the suttas. For example, in the Mangala Sutta, the Buddha says the highest blessing, in the very first verse of the Mangala Sutta, the Buddha says the highest blessing is to be able to keep away from the fools and to stay with the wise people. Because if we stay around people who do unwholesome things, we are social beings as humans, and we always want to have approval from other people, and we want to live in a community where there is no conflict and where other people approve of us. So if we live with bad people, then they will influence us to do things that are unwholesome. And we will feel pressure to actually do that in order to have a harmonious community with them. But if we are able to stay with wise people, then they will encourage us to do wholesome things. And that's also the reason why the Buddha created the Sangha, why the Buddha created a fourfold community of the monastics and the lay people, so that we can encourage each other in the wholesome things, and we can prevent each other from being influenced in these negative ways. Because it's so easy for us to not listen to our inner conscience, not listen to our inner voice, and instead give in to outside pressure and do unwholesome things. And in the end, if we do that, then obviously we create bad karma for ourselves, and then we have to live with those unfortunate consequences. And as we will see, things do not turn out well for the nun Medya after she goes ahead with this, and she has to suffer from some pretty severe consequences as a result of the pressure that she caves into. And as I mentioned, this is like something that really, really easily happens. And we always think, oh, we would be stronger, we wouldn't be influenced by this, we have a moral compass. But actually, once you're in the situation, it's very easy to follow the expectations of others instead of listening to your own voice. You have to be very strong and very courageous in order to free yourself from all these social pressures, from all the peer pressure. Anyway, so in this case, now Medya gives in and does as her brother wants her to do. And the monk Medya then went to the Buddha, and having paid homage at his feet, sat to one side. Then the nun Medya came to the Buddha, and having paid homage at his feet, stood to one side and said, "World-honored one, how comes it that Dabbamalaputta has sexually harassed me?" And the monk Medya says, "It's true, world-honored one." So the nun Medya makes the claim that Dabbamalaputta has sexually harassed her, and then the monk Medya backs her up and says, "It's true, it's true." So she, it's basically like she has a witness for the, sexual harassment that she claims has happened. So now there's two people on her side, and Dabbamalaputta is all alone on his side. So let's see what happens. At that time, the monk Dabba was among those present. The Buddha asked him, "Did you hear this?" And Dabba answered, "World-honored one, the Buddha knows me." The Buddha said, "In this case, you cannot say like this. If you have done it, you should say, 'I remember.' If you have not done it, you should say, 'I do not remember.'" He answered the Buddha, "World-honored one, I truly do not remember this." So let's unpack what's happening here. So first of all, the Buddha, we see that the Buddha doesn't just believe what's going on or doesn't just dismiss it. He actually starts an investigation. He directly asks Dabba for his statement. What does he have to say to this? He asks, "Did you hear this?" So basically, what's your reaction here? And Dabba says, "World-honored one, the Buddha knows me." So obviously, Dabba doesn't have a witness, but Dabba also doesn't clearly say, "I did it," or he doesn't clearly say, "I didn't do it." He just says, "Well, Buddha, you should know me." And of course, Dabba knows that the Buddha knows that he is an arahant, so there's no way that he could sexually harass a woman or any other being, any other person. But of course, the whole assembly is there, and the monks in the assembly, or the monastics in the assembly, monks and nuns, maybe don't all know that Dabba is an arahant, or maybe they don't all have faith in his enlightenment, who knows. So the Buddha says, in this case, you can't just say, the Buddha knows me. You have to make a clear statement. You have to say, I did it. Or like the Buddha here says, I remember. That basically means I did it. Or you have to clearly say, I didn't do it. So maybe the phrasing here is a little bit weird. I remember and I do not remember. This refers to other Vinaya procedures, actually. So in the Vinaya, we have procedures. And the idea is, if you remember, then you remember that you've done it, or you clearly remember that you haven't done it. So it's not that if you don't remember, doesn't mean that you might have done it and you have forgotten. That's not what it means. It means you clearly remember that you have done it, or you clearly remember that you haven't done it. So if you don't remember, it means you clearly haven't done it. It doesn't mean that you kind of forgot what exactly happened. So anyway, Dabba then says, I truly do not remember this, which means I definitely did not do this. So he makes a clear statement in front of all the monks that he didn't do this, instead of just saying, the Buddha knows me, the Buddha knows me. So he makes a clear statement. And of course, again, this is a situation I think that many of us can maybe relate to, maybe not with the sexual harassment necessarily, but that people come and they accuse us of something and they blame us for something that we really didn't do, and we really feel that we're innocent. But it's very, very difficult to deal with that kind of situation, especially if it's 2 against 1. Like in this case, Metya, the nun, even brought a witness. Obviously, the witness is also lying here, her brother, because they're having a grudge against Dabba. But this is something that can very easily happen in daily life as well, that you're accused, and there's really no good option to get out of that situation. Like you can clearly say, I did this, or you can clearly say, I didn't do this, but then people might believe you or people might not believe you. And these kind of things can create a lot of problems. And of course, back in the day, when the Buddha was there, the Buddha could read people's minds and he knew what was true and what wasn't. But for the rest of the Sangha, and also nowadays when there's no Buddha around, it's not that easy to know what is true and what isn't. And even in this case, as we will see now, even though Dabba is making that statement in front of the Buddha, people are starting to question Dabba. And other monks, and here in this case, are starting to question what is going on. So this next passage is a passage where the monk Rahula obviously is the Buddha's son, and seems to be quite young at this point still, probably not an arahant himself at this point. Rahula questions Dabba's integrity here. And this next passage about Rahula is something that is unique to the Chinese text here. This isn't something that we find in the Pali version. So the text continues. Here Rahula said, World-honored one, this monk Dabba has sexually harassed the nun Metya, and the monk Metya has borne witness saying Dabba sexually harassed Metya. What else is Dabba supposed to say? So Rahula now takes it as a given that Dabba has actually sexually harassed the nun. And he says, well, of course, Dabba is claiming to be innocent. What's he supposed to say? Of course, you wouldn't just admit to doing this kind of crazy thing or this kind of unwholesome action as a monk. So Rahula is doubting the truthfulness of Dabba's statement. But the Buddha then says to Rahula, if you were slandered by the nun Metya, if you were to say, Rahula has sexually harassed me, and the monk Metya had also testified, I have seen how Rahula sexually harassed Metya, what would you say? So the Buddha is saying, well, if they were, instead of saying the things about Dabba, they were saying the things about you, Rahula, how would you react? And Rahula answered, World-honored one, slandered, I would only say, the Bhagavan knows me, he himself is witness to my innocence. And the Buddha said, even you know this. How could Dabba, pure and innocent, fail to say it? So Rahula then also acknowledges that if he were slandered, he also didn't have any other option other than to appeal to the Buddha and to say that the Buddha is the witness of his innocence, because there's obviously no proof. And the Buddha says, even you know this, so this implies that Rahula at this point isn't a very experienced person. He's probably still a child or a teenager. Very likely he's not an arahant yet at this point. Probably he's not an adult yet at this point. And now the Buddha here makes the statement that Dabba is pure and innocent. And of course, Dabba's first reaction was exactly the same as what Rahula suggested, to say that the Buddha knows me, and to appeal to the Buddha as the witness. And then the Buddha told the monks, you can recite the Vinaya together with Dabba. The Nanmetya has been undone by her own words. So now after the Buddha has investigated the matter, he makes a statement and he says, you can recite Vinaya together with Dabba. So that is a declaration of Dabba's innocence. And I think most people of you listening here, you will know that monks and nuns, we recite our monastic code, the Patimokkha, every 2 weeks on the moon days, the full moon day and the new moon day. And you can only participate in the recitation of the monastic code if you have cleared out all the offenses that you have committed. So if there is an accusation in the room, if somebody accuses you of any kind of misbehavior, then this has to be investigated first before you can go ahead with the recitation of the monastic code. And the Sangha also has to take the appropriate measures for whatever kind of accusation is there, and make sure that if the monastic is unwilling to clear the offense, that they are not able to participate in the recitation of the monastic code. But here, because Dabba is innocent, the Buddha tells the monks, you can recite Vinaya together with Dabba. And he says, well, the Nanmetya is the one who is in the wrong here. So in this case, obviously, Dabba is lucky because there is a Buddha around and the Buddha can read minds and the Buddha knows what is true and what isn't true. In our own daily life, that may not always be the case. Obviously, usually there is no Buddha around. And sometimes when we are accused and we are actually innocent, things can be quite uncomfortable for us because sometimes there will be an investigation and sometimes the truth will come out and sometimes it won't. And sometimes we just have to live with the fact that some people will believe all the slander, and that can have very, very strong ramifications for us, and that can cause a lot of problems for us. And if that happens because there's no Buddha around in modern times, then the only thing we can do is, well, apply our Dhamma practice to our situation and recognize that everything is impermanent and our reputation is also impermanent, and that it's very easy for people to make trouble, and that impermanence and suffering is very inherent in our experience of samsara, and that the 8 worldly dhammas are present in our life, and that fame and disrepute are 2 sides of the same coin, and that we are bound, as long as we're stuck in samsara, we are bound to experience both of these, both fame and disrepute, and it's not necessarily always fair what happens to us, or it doesn't seem fair. In some way, we can say it's maybe an expression of our own karma, but it can seem quite random sometimes how this manifests in our life. And then the best way to deal with these kind of situations is to make as the Buddha says here, make a clear statement, tell people that you're innocent. But if that doesn't help, then the only thing is to reflect on the Dhamma and to develop a very strong sense of urgency, because you can clearly see the suffering in samsara. Develop a very strong sense of urgency, what we call samvega in Pali, and use this as a motivation for this, to get out of this wheel of rebirth that will always put us in situations that are beyond our control, and where these kind of things can always happen. So for that reason, I actually like this sutta, because I think it's very, very relatable. And it does talk about things that even happen to arahants. These kind of things even happen to the Buddha in other suttas. It did happen to arahants, and it can also happen to pretty much all of us. But in this case, there is a Buddha around, so it was handled fairly skillfully. And at this point now, the monks, having received the Buddha's order, sternly interrogated the monk Medya. Where did you see Daba harassing Medya? Did you alone see it, or were others with you? So they were starting to really, really strongly question him and putting a lot of pressure on him to kind of figure out what's going on here. And when questioned in this way, Medya could not reply. Only then did he concede his slander. When Daba sent me to accept donors' invitations, 3 times I have received spoiled food. Out of greed, hatred, and ignorance, I have slandered him. So in the end, there is somewhat of a happy end. It is clear that like the wrongdoer clearly admits to what he did, and Daba's innocence is proven in the end. So it is a happy end for Daba in this particular case. And then when later the world-honored one emerged from his silent abode and sat on the prepared seat in front of the assembled monks, the monks told him, "World-honored one, we have recited the Vinaya with Daba and expelled Medya, the nun. Through interrogating Medya, the monk, we have learned that Daba was falsely accused." So in this case, the truth is found out. Daba is cleared of all accusations. However, as you can imagine, tensions were still high between Daba and the group of 6 monks. So the group of 6 monks did not stop at this point creating problems for Daba. So the aversion that they had towards Daba wasn't resolved just because of the proceedings that they went through here. So as you can imagine, if you are the monk Medya, you have a grudge against, you are subjected to all this questioning from the Sangha, it wouldn't really do much for you to alleviate your anger. Probably you'd be more angry afterwards than you were before. And especially if you are somewhat of a bad monk and you're not really interested in practicing properly, you probably wouldn't have many skillful means at your disposal for letting go of that anger. And that is also what we see in other Vinaya stories. There are more and more stories where the group of 6 monks are creating problems for Daba. Actually, the story of Daba continues in such a way that we have the story of Daba's parinirvana. So when Daba, at some point, when he was still fairly young, Daba decided that it was enough now and that he wanted to enter parinibbana. And he went to the Buddha, he took leave from the Buddha, and then he displayed a lot of various miracles to again show that he was a spiritually powerful person, and so that there were no doubts about his attainment of arahantship. And the Buddha also confirmed his attainment of arahantship. And then finally, as I mentioned, Daba had mastery over the fire element, and he entered the fire element and also cremated his own body and then attained parinibbana. And one of the main reasons why Daba decided to pass away so early was that he was experiencing so much hostility from the group of 6 monks. And as I mentioned, they were in all the major centers of Buddhism at that time. And so it wasn't easy for somebody who wants to serve the Sangha, such as Daba, to go to a place where there were no representatives of the group of 6 monks. Here in this particular case, Daba's innocence is proven. And when this was reported to the Buddha, then the Buddha spoke the verse which is at the end of the sutta, and the Buddha says, "If all one has accomplished is merely lies, has thrown away his future, there is no evil that he will not do. Rather with this body, swallow a hot iron ball, then having broken the precepts, accept offerings made in pure faith." When the Buddha had finished speaking, the monks, having listened to what he had said, were happy and remembered it well. So here again, the Buddha is taking up this incident for a Dhamma teaching, and he is speaking about keeping precepts, especially in this case, the precept about not lying. And among the 5 precepts, the precept about not lying is the only one that has to do with speech. The other precepts all have to do with bodily actions, such as not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, and no drinking of alcohol and intoxicants. So these are all things we do with the body, but the speech precept, the not lying precept, is our precept that refers to verbal actions, the only one that refers to verbal actions. And many people always say that the precept that is the most difficult to keep is the precept about not lying. Because the precepts we do with the body, there is some sort of preparation time. It doesn't happen instantly usually. So at any point in the process, you can establish mindfulness and you can refrain from what you're doing. And because the body is a much more gross level of action, it's much easier to restrain that. But because the speech is so immediate, something pops in our mind and it just comes out of the mouth. And sometimes we don't even, like only after we have spoken it, we realize what we just said. Like we don't even know before what we're doing or what we're saying. That's why people say it's so easy to break the speech precepts, and it's so difficult to actually observe practice of not lying. And now the Buddha says, well, if you have this habit of lying, then you throw away your future, because that will lead you down a very, very slippery slope. So once you've lied once, then you don't want to admit your fault. You don't want to admit that you've lied. So you'll lie again to cover up the lie before. And then you lie again, and your lies get bigger and bigger, and you build this entire castle of lies. And eventually it gets to the point where you actually have to engage in unskillful bodily actions in order to make sure that your castle of lies doesn't collapse and everybody sees how everything you say is actually just lies. So from one small lie, it's a very slippery slope to a massive problem. And that leads you to breaking all the other precepts. Just so that you can cover up all the lies that you have told. And then in the second stanza, the Buddha talks about it's better to actually, like the pain that you would have if you swallowed a hot iron ball, that pain would actually be less than if you, then the bad karma and the suffering that comes from accepting offerings in pure faith. So accepting offerings from other people. So abusing the trust or abusing the confidence that other people have in you, or misleading other people into believing that you're a pure person when you actually are somebody who is lying or who is breaking precepts. So in Buddhism especially, because sharing is, giving and sharing is such a strong practice of Buddhists. Many people, not only monastics, but also lay people, often experience that other people are giving them things. People who want to support your practice, people who have trust and faith in you, people who think that you are committed practitioners. But if actually we're just having a facade of committed practice, and inwardly we're actually not even practically, we're just breaking precepts, we think that maybe such as in this case, we think that lying isn't that much of a problem, or we don't have a problem misleading other people, then the karma that comes from pretending to be a pure spiritual practitioner when we actually aren't is really, really devastating. So, of course, this in this case refers here in the sutta to the 6 monks who are pretending to be monks and who are very much interested in getting all these donations, such as in this case, Metya, getting all the delicious food. So pretending to be monks, pretending to be holy people, spiritual people in order to get donations, but actually just deceiving people and actually not training properly. So this is the end of today's sutta. As you can see, this is a very, very different sutta from the suttas we have read so far. But I think it's an extremely relatable sutta, and the 2 most important points for me in this sutta were the situation of the nun Metya, who seems to be a fairly good-hearted person and have a strong moral compass, and who actually doesn't want to, like she clearly recognizes that this is slander and that this is unwholesome and doesn't really want to do it, but is pressured into doing it, like more or less against her will, by the people that she is surrounded with, especially by her family member, her brother. So out of social pressures, she consents to doing unwholesome things, and she's harming herself because of the surrounding that she is in. And then the other point is about how to react when we are unfairly accused. And sometimes there is really no good way out. Sometimes all we can do is say very clearly that we are innocent, and then use the situation for our practice to develop a sense of urgency, to develop disenchantment with samsara, and to use these insights in suffering that is generated from such a situation to get out and in order to strengthen our practice. So this is why I like this sutta. I think it's very applicable to people nowadays. I think we can, the characters in the sutta are extremely relatable, and the situations are situations that come up very often. So at this point, I think we can finish the sutta for today. And if you have any questions or comments, then you can leave them in the live chat. So I see there are quite a few messages in the chat. So let me have a look. Okay. Nirajan asks, Ayya, do you have knowledge of any arahant in this world? Let me know, Ayya. So, well, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? Well, I have full faith that the Buddha was an arahant, and I have full faith that there were many monks and nuns over time that were arahants. As for the modern world, I don't think I want to point to any particular person. And even if I did, that would just be my opinion. So I think the best way is to just focus on our own practice and try ourselves to make progress on the path and become noble people ourselves. So I don't think I can point to any specific person, I'm afraid. And Igor says, is it possible to offer to invite to feed the whole Sangha long term, for example, each day for 30 days or more? Yeah, sure, of course. So in the suttas, we have many different forms of inviting people. We have, like, you can invite people only just for one specific occasion, like for one day. You could, and if you do that, you could either invite an entire Sangha or a smaller group of monks and nuns. You could also offer a regular meal donation, which is what was mentioned in the sutta today. So there was a layperson who every single day they invite a small number of monks or nuns to their house. Let's say they invite, I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe even two, 3 people. But every single day, 2 or 3 people come to, 2 or 3 monastics come to their house, and then the monks or nuns will take turn, so that over time, each and every member of the Sangha would come to that house. Or there could be a time limit, just as you mentioned, for example, 30 days. So you invite either a whole Sangha or a smaller group every single day for a certain period of time, let's say 30 days. In the sutta, what is also often mentioned is that they invite for the Vassa. The Vassa is a 3-month retreat every year. So, and it's usually considered a very meritorious period. So some people would invite an entire Sangha or a small group of monks and nuns for every day of the Vassa, so for every day of the 3-month period. In the sutta, that is often mentioned that kings would do that because kings have the financial means to support such a large group for such a long period of time. So kings would invite entire sanghas to stay in a certain place for 90 days and to provide the meals for that entire period. And what is very often done in Buddhist countries also is that one family would invite a large group of sangha, and then they would invite all their relatives and all their friends and all their neighbors to come and chip in, so that there's one person who, or one family who organizes the event, but the whole neighborhood or the whole family, the whole community comes together and participates and brings food and participates in the joyous occasion, so that the merits are shared and everybody has a sense of community and doing wholesome things together. So that's very, very common also in Buddhist countries, that to manage these very large occasions when even like dozens or hundreds or sometimes even thousands of monks and nuns come together for the events. Okay. And Gita says, so said Ayya, that even when the Buddha was alive, this sort of situation could happen. It just goes to show that getting rid of one's defilements is not easy. Thank you, Ayya. Yes, that is true. And even in the Sangha and even in Buddhist communities, like even the fourfold communities or communities, most people are not enlightened. Most people are just practitioners on the path. And even people who sincerely practice are not free from the time. And so these kind of conflicts of the desire to get rid of greed, hatred, and delusion. Of course, in that situation, the defilements will run rampant because they have no interest in restraining them. And this is just samsara. There's just no ideal place in samsara. So whatever we do, when we join monastic life, we can't expect to live in paradise for the rest of our lives. The defilements will still be there, our own and those of other people, especially. And we can't control other people. Like in lay life, we can sort of control the people we're living with. Hopefully, we are choosing our life partner, or we can choose to live alone, live our own. In one can't. Like literally, anyone can just like live with you, and monks and nuns come and go, and communities change all the time. So you don't really pick. Like not all monks and nuns would be your best friends, and you don't really pick the different characters that come in. So yeah, these kind of situations happened back then. These kind of situations even happened to the Buddha. There was a story of other people, ascetics of a non-Buddhist movement, being jealous of the Buddha and inciting a woman ascetic to claim that she was pregnant from the Buddha, that she was carrying the Buddha's child, and the Buddha was being slandered by the people in town. So these kind of situations happened back then, and they still happen now. So even in my personal experience, I have similar things happen in monastic sanghas. So this really is something that we are confronted with both in lay life and in monastic life, these unfair accusations. And the best thing to do in this case is to make a clear statement so that people know what is your position, whether you like, if you're innocent, at least say you're innocent, so that people have the chance to know what your position is, and then use this for your practice, to make insight into impermanence and suffering. And then Sud asks, based on this, is slander always a lie, or can true statements be considered slander? So I guess you're asking if somebody is truly doing very, very horrible things, should you talk about that, or would that also be slander? So it's kind of difficult to, I don't really know what you're referring to, but let's make an example. So let's say something that, let's say that the statement was actually true. Like there actually was a monk, and that monk sexually harassed a woman. So would it be slander if people started to talk about this and to criticize the monk? And in that case, the Buddha said there are certain criteria that we should look at to figure out if we should speak or not. Even if it's true, we should check, is it, first of all, is it true or is it not true? If it's not true, then we shouldn't say it. But if it is true, then we should check, is it beneficial? So, for example, if we talk about the sexual harassment that happened, will that be beneficial? Will it, for example, protect other women? Will it protect other people? Will it help the woman who has been attacked? So is there something good we can achieve if we speak up, or are we just speaking out of hostility? Is there nothing beneficial going to come from this? Usually in the case of sexual harassment, it's often speak up because it can protect other people, but it also depends on the situation. So the first thing to check, is it true? The second thing to check, is it beneficial? The third thing to check is it the right time? So sometimes it's true and it might be beneficial, but we have to find the skillful moment to talk about this. So sometimes it's good to speak with people who, like an ombudsperson, a person who's appointed to skillfully deal with difficult situations, who can act as a mediator. But if you just randomly talk to random people on the street, maybe that's not going to be a beneficial outcome. So it has to be the right situation. It has to be true, it has to be beneficial, and it has to be the right moment in the right situation. And in that case, obviously, speaking up will be very, very wholesome, especially if you have a good motivation, such as protecting other people. But if those conditions are not fulfilled, you really should think about whether it's skillful or not, and whether it's the right moment to speak about this or not. And then AS says, wise speech also develops our sila, yes, and metta for ourselves and others too, yes. Yes, so wise speech, as I mentioned just now, has these three characteristics. It has to be true, it has to be beneficial, and it has to be spoken at the right time. And of course, speech is one very, very fundamental part of sila. Lying is one of the 5 precepts. The 4 kinds of right speech are part of wholesome trainings. So definitely it's very, very important. Also metta, cultivating metta is good. So as I mentioned, we always speak, when we speak, we reflect, is this beneficial? So we have a positive attitude. Ideally, we should, for example, in the example I have just given, we should speak with the intention of protecting future victims from sexual abuse, for example. But we also can cultivate the idea that we will protect the perpetrator from making further bad karma. So we don't really want to punish them, but we want to actually protect them from their own unskillfulness with which they are acting in that case. And Amaranta says, I appreciate this teaching. It's really admirable to use these accusations in a way of practice patience and equanimity. That is true. So yeah, suttas like this, sometimes they're a little bit difficult to talk about because they, well, obviously these are very, very difficult situations, and especially accusations of sexual harassment can be very difficult on so many levels, because if somebody is unfairly accused, that's a huge burden on that person's life, and that really destroys that person's reputation. On the other hand, if it's true, and we don't protect the victims, and we just let those people traumatize, and it's also a very, very big problem. So skillfully dealing with this whole issue is very difficult, but just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. Because it's difficult means that we actually have to look at this, because it's challenging us. And if we talk about this, then we can learn a lot about our own defilements, and we can learn a lot about how to skillfully handle these kind of situations. So Sam has a final comment saying that Daba displaying the 18 kinds of miraculous transformation is hard to comprehend. Yeah, so the 18 kinds of miraculous transformation is something that comes up in the Chinese suttas. In the Pali suttas, we don't really call it the 18 kinds of transformation, but these are, in the Pali suttas, we just call this the psychic powers, or like the magical powers, the transformations, so, flying through the air and walking through walls and making the body invisible and these kind of things. So yeah, in Buddhism, we think that this is a function of attaining very deep samadhi based on the fourth jhana. If this is difficult for you to take on board, then this is really not an important part of Buddhist practice. It's more like an interesting aside. So don't think too much about this if this is somehow not inspiring to you. But yeah, I mean, this is something we do find in the suttas, and it is something that can be attained with very deep samadhi for some people, not for everybody. Okay, we are sort of coming to the end of today, so I'm taking one last question that Sud just posted, and then we can finish for today. But Sud is asking, is the tendency to slander coming from a fault-finding mind as the root cause of it? Can you mention any suttas that talk more about verbal conduct? Thank you. So, well, slander definitely comes from a fault-finding mind. Also, slander usually is based on aversion. It can be based on greed. For example, we are greedy for something, we didn't get it, then we're jealous, and we can slander somebody out of jealousy. But in that case, also, like, the aversion and greed is kind of mixed up, and mostly it is based on aversion. We don't like something, and then we don't like somebody, and then we slander that person. And can I mention any suttas that talk about verbal conduct? So there are suttas that talk about the 10 kinds of wholesome actions. For those 10 kinds are obviously the speech precepts. So those are not lying, and then not talking divisively, not talking harshly, and not gossiping or talking about nonsensical random stuff. Those are all over the suttas, and I think they're quite easy to find. So they're in so many suttas, I probably don't need to mention any, but especially in the Majjhima Nikaya, they're very, very many. Then the one that I was talking just now about, how to check whether speech is wholesome, where you have to check whether it's true, whether it's beneficial, and whether it's at the right time. This is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, and I think it's called the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta. I'm fairly certain it's the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta. I'm 99% certain. And if you need to know the number of the sutta, then I have to quickly Google it, because I don't know. I just know it's in the Majjhima Nikaya. So give me a minute and I will see. Majjhima Nikaya number 85. And I'll just quickly open it to make sure that this is actually the right one. Okay, so I found the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, but this may not be the one that I'm thinking about. I know this is a sutta about a prince, so it might be Prince Abhaya instead of Prince Bodhi. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to search too much, it might be Prince Abaya instead of Prince Bodhi. So let's see. Anyway, I will look it up and I'll let you know on Thursday, since we are having another sutta class on Thursday. Or I will post it in the description box or in the comment section below. So you can check back in a few minutes, and then the reference will be there. So I don't want to drag out the recording for too long, because it would be boring for people. And I think at this point, since there are no more further questions, we can finish for today with 3 sadhus. And feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I will see you all on Thursday, or otherwise I will see you all next week. Have a good day.